Good morning and welcome back to the VIP seat. Today, the SAIC disaster, accident at Telluride. Sit back, buckle up, and let's take off. Okay, Preston. So this weekend, the Southern Aircraft Consultancy, Inc. issue went totally bonkers. For those who have not heard, there were over 600 aircraft that were deregistered by the FAA overnight. No one expected it. It was really fast. There were multiple town halls and posts about this going on. But you actually have uncovered a little bit of the story here that we all want to know about.
Yeah, so for those that have been sleeping under a rock, because everybody has led with this story in their newsletter, like over the weekend and end of last week, the Southern Aircraft Consultancy, Inc., SACI, I guess for short, is not to be confused with SACI. It has basically had all of their registrations from the FAA revoked. What it was it's called a foreign ownership trust. So the FAA has some really weird rules around foreign ownership of aircraft. If you register it to your own personal name and you are a permanent alien, this is not legal advice to be clear, but I just learned this. I just had a transaction that I had to work on this for. If you are a resident alien and you register the aircraft to your own person, to your name, you can own an aircraft that's unregistered in the United States. If you own it in an LLC, the beneficial owner ultimately has to be a human, it has to be a naturalized citizen of the United States. So if you're a green card holder, you cannot own an aircraft in an LLC in the United States. So that is basically the basis for why this company exists, or at least on the surface, that is what the basis is. I uncovered after asking a few questions and saying, I don't know if this is really as big of a deal as everybody's making it, that it wasn't as big of a deal as everybody is making it. The headline reads 637 aircraft, and you would think that means that 637 business jets, right? CJI does an emergency town hall. Everybody is, writing about this. I pulled up the CH Aviation article. Here's the business jets that are affected. A Citation jet that is 49.1 years old, a Citation Ultra, one Phenom 100, 4 Vision Jet G2s, a really old Hawker 800A, and an 800 XP. That is it. That is the extent of the business jets that are affected by this issue.
Yeah, so when I saw this story, like in the back of my mind, I'm like, okay, we're cracking down on Venezuela and Colombia. Maybe there's something going on with a non-citizen trust, because in the past, you look at a GAO report that was done a couple of years ago, there's been some really sketchy stuff happening, not by like the big names out there. I'm talking about like some of these really obscure, tiny little trusts. There was the aircraft guarantee issue a couple of years ago, which I'll get into a minute. But from what I understand, this has nothing to do with like the drug trade in Colombia or anything like that, right?
That is my understanding. So I will not, a good reporter never gives away their sources, but I did get a source who I trust with this type of information tell me that no, this is not a systematic problem with the owner trust. You would think that one could totally imagine that this is a systematic problem with the owner trust guarantee, owner trust structure, and basically that it was all crumbling. I had a couple of clients call me and say, hey, I just read this article. Does this mean that my trust is about to blow up? And so I, as a good person, I started asking around. And the reality is that the guy who started this was a United States citizen. He died. When he died, there was no transfer of ownership of this trust to another U.S. citizen. So therefore, it no longer passed the citizenship test of registration. And the way that these work is it's a tri-party agreement. I knew absolutely nothing about this until like 8 months ago, and when I had to really deep dive into how it works. So it's basically a tri-party agreement. So the aircraft is owned by a trust. That trust, according to the FAA, is owned by this guy. This trustee, trustee. And so they're an independent party. They have no default rights. There's a lot of they don't really have much. It's just they're a shell company for the FAA to recognize the ownership trust. And then for tax purposes and whatever else, the person who bought the airplane owns the aircraft. And they do a lease essentially, and it's kind of complicated to get around it. You could solve most of this problem if the FAA would wake up and get out of 1950 when this rule was written and just let foreign green card holders own an NREG'd aircraft in an LLC, and none of this would be a problem.
I think the problem, though, and this is where the FAA's stance is that they want an American citizen responsible when things go wrong. And when you look at a couple years ago, Aircraft Guarantee, Deborah something Mercer, she's in jail because she was running. She was doing escrow. There was a lot of stuff going on, but essentially she got held responsible for drug trafficking, even though she wasn't moving cocaine on any airplanes. She was held responsible for it because she was the trustee and the owner of the aircraft. And basically, the attorney said, look, she was signing her name on this, knowingly, allowing drug traffickers to operate. So she's a drug trafficker. So she went to jail. She's in jail right now over this issue. There is some component of enforceability and liability that the FAA wants on a person. They want to hold someone accountable. And that's the purpose of these trustees, is to be that person who's accountable and to have the best interest of the United States when they're executing these duties. So that's where I see the point there a little bit, but I don't know how much it's actually doing because it seems pretty complicated.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is that now you're relying on these owner trustees to do all of their own KYC, which they should be doing their KYC. Mm-hmm. But what is to stop someone from posing as a good person and then running drugs and now you're going to jail? That does not seem fair or just to me. I don't know. That's just me. The other thing to note is that the majority of the aircraft that were held in this trust were Bonanzas, 170s, Piper Senecas, piston GA airplanes, because the EASA regulations are so strict that it was actually cheaper for these owners to fly to the United States, shop for an aircraft, register it in this ownership trust, and then fly it back to Europe and not have to fly under EASA laws. And so that was kind of, calling it a scheme, I think, is a little bit harsh, but it was a strategy for kind of, reducing your cost. And so I think that the big lesson learned here is we need to stop being convinced that the sky is falling when something like this gets announced. Yes, it does sound scary, but you legitimately, some of the conversations I was having, you would have thought that the ownership trust had gotten vetoed and the FAA didn't tell anybody, and now everybody's having to scramble and figure out what to do with their aircraft. It just wasn't the case.
Would have been cool if the FAA said a little bit about what happened, or at least indicated it, right, because instead of sitting the entire industry scrambling with their hair on fire. But yeah, from what you've learned, I would say this is a non-issue, but it is a good lesson for those of you who want to put your aircraft in a trust, because you should be doing it with a professional organization that's doing KYC, that has things in place. If something happens to somebody, you're not just going to have a deregistered airplane. A lot of to do about kind of nothing, really.
Yeah, you look at TVPX, Brett King is the guy who signs all the paperwork over there. He's the founder. I am 99% certain before this, and I am 100% certain after this, that there is a contingency plan in the event that he passes away unexpectedly, so that there is a continuation of service here. TVPX does not do general aircraft airplanes. That's one of the challenges. When you kind of get out of that very large Bank of Utah trustees or whatever, there's another one like that. There's a couple of very big players that do this. And then you have all these little ones, and you need to know who you're going for. So if you're a broker that's out there, I have some recommendations because I just went through this for piston aircraft for foreign ownership trusts. So if you need a suggestion, reach out to me.
Yeah, and there are some good reasons for doing this, by the way. A lot of people are like, oh, well, why do non-citizens need to hold airplanes and things? There are some cases in which, you may have multiple owners in an airplane, maybe one is foreign, maybe you have multiple corporations that are involved in your entity, and if you have a trust, you can kind of move that airplane around whenever you want to. So plenty of legitimate reasons why we need trust, but maybe pick and choose your trust wisely.
My clients are tax-paying green card holders. They file taxes, they pay taxes. The immigration process is very hard in the United States, and we shouldn't stop them from owning aircraft that are based here, because if you're going to fly intra United States, it has to be NREG. Like there's a lot of reasons to want an NREG aircraft and not be a United States citizen. So like I would say like the concern is not should this be allowed? I think that it should. It's more of, are you picking the right trust company that has a contingency plan in place that this type of thing doesn't?
Yeah. The VIP seat is brought to you by RealJet. One thing that sets RealJet apart is their commitment to safety and quality at every level. Every operator they work with meets top-tier industry standards. It's private aviation with real oversight, not guesswork. And when it comes to aircraft access, RealJet gives you the full spectrum. More than 1,500 premium options, from light jets to ultra-long-range cabins. From short regional flights to international missions, their team curates the ideal aircraft and operator to deliver a seamless, best-in-class experience. With RealJet, you feel the difference the moment you book. Real people, real trust, RealJet. All right, well, moving on to Mile High Madness. I'm going to show mine first, and it's a little self-serving, but Preston knows how excited I am about this. And I have to share the graphic that my husband came up with for our airplane that's coming soon.
This thing is awesome. Also, right. I love that Dan's Instagram is Farmer Dan.
We have a farm. Actually, I think I made that for him. But yes, I'm very excited. We have a Kodiak 900 coming. I mean, it's for the business, but still I'm hoping that occasionally I'll get to ride on it. And we're painting a shark face on the front of it. So I'm pretty excited.
I love the leg coming out of it. That's awesome.
Yeah, no, we have this whole, oh wait, actually you can't see the bottom of it. It says, this summer, Terror takes flight, coming soon. So if you see a blue and silver Kodiak 900 flying around, it might be my husband and his business partner, and maybe I'll get to ride it.
Yeah, Dan, if you're listening, which I know you are an avid listener to this podcast, y'all should take the Kodiak up to Chattanooga and we'll go find some cool backcountry strips or something and, pop around the Southeast. That'd be fun. Thanks. So mine is this Facebook post that I saw. And for those that don't know, this actually ties in really well to our next story. But this is the new ForeFlight update just dropped. It even runs on Android now. And it's just a picture of a paper logbook, which I thought was hysterical. It was like, so for those that are not in the joke, then not in the know, ForeFlight does not work on Android tablets. It's kind of like a rub that has been between ForeFlight and their users for a while. So you have to use an iPad, and it has to do like certification. There's like a whole long reason. But that was hilarious that it was basically like the new ForeFlight just dropped and now it's available on Android.
Well, and it could be indicative of what could happen in the future here with ForeFlight. So that was big news over the last week, was that Boeing Digital Aviation Services, which includes Jeppesen, ForeFlight, a number of these platforms, has been purchased by a private equity company, Thoma Bravo. They purchased it for $10.55 billion in an all-cash deal. We covered it a couple months ago, but what happened this week is that they have now begun announcing layoffs. And not only do they announce layoffs, but they said AI is coming for your job, so be prepared to be laid off, which I thought was a little rough.
Yeah. Private equity is infamous for coming in and corporate raiders and gutting the place and kind of, creating a little bit of chaos. But you don't say that part out loud, I don't think, right? No. It's like you can say that in closed meetings with your head of strategy and your
it's
CFO.
It's kind of obvious. Like we know it's coming. We know that the automation is going to take jobs, but do you have to send it out to the employees that are about to lose?
Yeah, exactly. I think it's a great way for people to start quitting. And maybe what they were doing was they wanted the people that were afraid of AI to quit and for the people who embraced AI to stay. But that's a curious strategy of how to go about it. But I will say private equity has never been given the accolade of tact when it comes to some of these things. They tend to be more of like a hammer than a precision surgeon needle. So not surprised, unfortunately. This is the second time, for those that don't know, this is the second time that ForeFlight has traded hands. So ForeFlight founders sold it to Boeing. Now Boeing has sold it to Thoma Bravo. So
yeah, I think in addition to, they said they're going to lay off 30 to 50% of cuts. That's what the internal chatter is. That's not like a number they put out there. The company actually said that that's misleading, but they also wouldn't say exactly how much they're doing. But I think a lot
It's
of people
39%, Jessie.
39.
Okay, it's not 40%, it's 39%.
It's a lot of people, but I think a lot of pilots are concerned. This is the chatter I'm seeing online too, is that, what happens to the integrity of these systems, because they are very, very safety critical for a lot of people. And one of the things that the CEO interviewed, I can't tell if he was asked this or he brought the word up himself, but he said his plan is not to inshitify the technology, which I had never heard that term before, but apparently that's some sort of phrase for when all these companies get, purchased and moved within the private equity system, and they become worse over time because private equity is trying to take their cut out of it, right? And optimize the technology. But again, firing someone by AI and then talking about enshittification publicly, I'm not sure I agree with the communication strategy at the moment.
Yeah, it's like, don't say the quiet part out loud at the end of the day, right? It's like, we all know it's fine. This was what everybody thought was going to happen. It's fine. Run your playbook, make it a little bit shitty, right? Like, it's okay. Just don't make it break, right? And they're going to jack the prices up. Like, just watch. In the next 6 months, you're going to get a significant price hike in ForeFlight, unfortunately, for pilots. So I think a lot of people are seeking alternatives. I saw in a lot of GA kind of groups talking about switching to Garmin. Garmin Pilot has an alternative. My friend runs one called Aviator Assistant that's an alternative. So there are alternatives out there to ForeFlight. It's just, it's the industry leader. And,
it does everything. To all these
great.
platforms.
It's a fantastic.
Yeah, it's completely integrated. It's perfect. So I don't I don't know. I don't know about the alternatives. So I'm just curious to see how much they can compete for.
I want to know how big that business is, because you couldn't really find it in Boeing because they hid it through a bunch of layers. You're going to buy kind of that whole group for $10.55 billion. How big is the ForeFlight business? It's got to be insane, right? It's got to be hundreds of millions of dollars of annual recurring revenue.
Yeah, just Jeppesen. There's got to be big government contracts involved here. There's so much going on. And they were even, back in the day, GE Digital was doing FOQA and flight data monitoring. So I think there's so much going on in that business. We don't even know everything that they do.
Yeah. I would have loved to have clipped a few fees on that one. Can you imagine 1% of 10.55 billion? I think you might never have to work ever again.
That's when you get a big yacht in South Florida that just says EBITDA. EBITDA on the back of it.
EBITDA. Are you an EBITDA or EBITDA?
EBITDA.
Yeah, some guys in the South, EBITDA.
It's EBITDA. I'm not going to change the way I say it.
I heard someone spell it EBITDA, and I was like, there's a cliff over there, jump off it.
Yeah, no, we don't spell it out. It's EBITDA or EBITDA.
Yeah. All right, moving on. Speaking of EBITDA, there's probably some EBITDA in this acquisition of sorts, and I'm on the road, so I don't have the M&A gong. I'm very sorry. I'm also not 100% sure you should be ringing it in this situation.
Well, it's a divesting / Okay, anyway, sorry.
Yeah, I guess Vista gets the anti-M&A gong, but yet James and co get the M&A gong. So Talon Air, for those that aren't in operator world, are an operator, Long Island-based operator. They had basically had part of their business sold to Vista via an exposure of another acquisition. So this was not like Vista came knocking and bought part of Talon. It was somebody else owned a piece of Talon and then Vista bought that company. So they have, for an undisclosed amount of money, repurchased the rest of Talon Air. So this was led by the CEO, James Chitty, and bought it back from Vista. So we ring the M&A gong for you, James Chitty, for buying your own company.
Yeah. So this brought so many memories back because I started in this business in 2015. And this is when all these characters were coming out of the woodwork. The industry was very creative at the time. We had the Jet Smarters, we had Vista starting up, we had Talon, we had Apollo, all these different people. And this took me back because I had to go through, okay, wait, how are all these characters related and who bought this company? So my assessment, and this is speculation, but I've got pretty good substantiation to bring it up, but James Chitty was the founder of Plane Clear. In 2016, Apollo Jets, who was a huge broker led by Al Palagonia and Dean Giazzi, Plane Clear became a part of Apollo. So James Chitty joins with these guys. Apollo, in around the same time, I think it was 2018, maybe 2017, they invested in Talent Air. So James Chitty, Al Palagonia, Dean Giazzi were now partners in Talent Air. At some point, Vista buys not only Talon, but they also buy Apollo. So all these people got scooped up into the Vista network. Now someone's bought it back. My assessment and my guess at this is that it's the same people, because Chitty said in a quote in another article this week, the group I'm affiliated with initially bought Talon in 2018. Our investment group purchased the equity back from Vista, so that Vista family of companies is no longer affiliated with Talon other than as a charter customer. So my thought is that the Apollo team is back together to run Talent Air.
Yeah, I love that sleuthing. You should have had your sleuth hat on during that one.
Oh, it was.
Yeah, everybody in this story is an absolute character, by the way. And like you said, right, there was a lot of, in that era, there's a lot of people buying and investing in each other's companies.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is, I don't know if this is an unwinding. I think I always personally had the question of, what does Talon do inside of the Vista ecosystem? Like, I knew that they were a part of it, but it always felt like they were only kind of part of it, right? They were not, they were still operated under their own flag and kind of their own brand. They had their own management clients. It was kind of the management arm of Vista. Vista's strategy is like, make big giant orders, get discounted scale, maybe sell your own company planes, but I don't know, that was allegedly. But this was the management group. So people would own aircraft, Talon would manage it, and then they would fly it on charter certificate, maybe for Vista clients, maybe not. So they really operated as independent companies. So this makes a lot of sense to be able to really scale and grow the company and do exactly what it is that you want. And they have been growing pretty significantly. I know I had a client go to them in December, and they grew like a ton in December right before they bought it. Hopefully they didn't have to pay like multiples on all the work that they did in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, I mean, my theory here is if it's Al, and this is a big if, I'm just speculating, but it seems like it is. He has so many connections in the sports and entertainment industry. Like, those are his customers. So if I had to guess, maybe at some point, and maybe this was kind of always the plan. Maybe there was a period where, hey, let's work together and let's, all bring money into the same pile. And now they're like, okay, let's go our own ways. Vista's got its own thing going on. Maybe it's divesting from other businesses. And Al just wants to get back into doing what he does with his company.
Yep, exactly. Vista wheels up, some of these darlings of the industry, 2015, 16, 17, 18, through kind of the zero interest rate, have all been divesting of the businesses that they bought when they had piles and piles of cash. So they're all kind of divesting of some of those businesses. We've seen that's been a major trend over the last 2 years. Shut down Mountain Air. They got rid of a couple of their other tangential businesses to try and focus on core profitability. And so this is another example of someone from that era. And now you have Flyhouse, who's going up and kind of on the ramp up, right? So you have them buying everybody while you have kind of the two that are post maturity selling off the non-core businesses. So I don't know. It's interesting. It's an interesting time to watch in kind of the roll up, the strategic roll up space, not necessarily the large money aggregator type.
Well, I was looking at this from like every market, there's cycles in every market. And I think this huge arc that happened was there was post 2008, aircraft prices were depressed. There were new charter opportunities coming to market, which is why you had Grandview Aviations, why you had Vistas, everybody else, because you could get assets, you could operate them for profit, and do pretty well. And so those businesses really grew until, post-COVID era, when the numbers just went totally bonkers and everything sold for like so much cash. We're in a period now where like, okay, wait, that doesn't always work that way. Aircraft prices are a lot higher now, so you're not seeing that kind of activity. I think in those unique business models, you're seeing the move to the fractional, those business plans that don't require a lot of capital because capital is more expensive now and the assets are more expensive now. So we need to go back to the fractional or management models. So had a lot of consolidation in the charter space. everything got expensive. Now everyone's kind of divesting those charter entities, or they're consolidating in certain areas like fractional. So it's an interesting arc. I feel very fortunate that I was part of that like 2015 to 2021 period, because man, was it a crazy time.
Yeah, no kidding. But I think that it's a little more healthy to have business stability and to focus on profitability, because that's good for the long-term health of our business. The promise was always we will get to profitability once we get to scale. Questionably didn't happen. So here we are.
No, there were a lot of
Everybody
businesses
getting
that
fit.
were. The factors were different at that time, though. I mean, crew salaries were less, airplanes were less. Yeah.
Well, what I mean by that is you had the people with a ton of money that were just hyperscale and didn't care as much about profitability. They cared about scale. Yes. And it was going to become, Uber is like a great example. They were unprofitable until all of a sudden they turned on the money machine, and it was like, it's ridiculous. That just never happened in private aviation. They just, grew, scaled, made money, didn't make money, accrued large losses, kind of depending on, which company it was.
Yes.
Yeah. So, well, speaking of Vista and divesting of businesses, one of the former Vista companies has been in the news, not exactly for the best way recently.
Yes. So this was in the news, a few months ago, but Red Wing Aeroplane Company was an old certificate of Vista that was sold end of last year to Bel Air, which has now become Jet Excellence. And unfortunately, Jet Excellence has been in the news over the weekend for some not so good issues. There was an excursion at Telluride, some really substantial pictures coming from some different people online, but we don't know what happened. We'll have to wait for the investigation to come out. But I will say Telluride is a crazy airport. We never went there in the Phenom 300. It can be done, but it's within a very, very tight margin. I just want to say to operators out there, if you're going to operate in that airport, Aspen, any of these, please, please, please make sure you're doing additional training on these airports, because they're very, very tricky. If you're not stable, if you run into any sort of issues, which happens at this airport, you can have a problem. I mean, I was like skiing there one time, and I'm on the little lift going up the thing, and I see Telluride Airport, and my lift is like being like shaken like this in the air, and I'm like, this is a scary airport to go to.
Yeah. So what the pilots have reported is that they experienced a significant crosswind right upon landing that caused them to go off the runway. The big question that I have is the 300 yards part. I think that's like the big glaring, like it skidded for like 300 yards. And I don't know if like a small crosswind burst might cause that. I don't know, maybe not. But the thing that I've seen a lot of people point out in their kind of analysis is one, I don't care how gusty, but one gust of crosswind doesn't create the outcome that kind of it was, right? Maybe you drop one set of landing gear or something like that. I don't know. I've never flown into Telluride. I have, no experience in that. If you look at the pictures though, it's a tabletop in a bowl. It's literally a bowl like this. And then there's just, if you look and you can see through the mountains, you're like, oh, I think that's a runway.
Between a bunch of mountains and wind gusts that are constantly, it's crazy.
Wind shear and all that good stuff. Yeah. So it's unfortunate that it happened. I think the second order effects here are some of the other questions that have started to come out around the Citation 10, that has started to come out around the operator, around maintenance and things like that. I think that this accident, very unfortunate, very thankful that everybody walked away and was completely fine, into a very sketchy, tricky airport that has no margin for error. And so you have maybe a little bit more forgiveness if or compassion, if you will, for those airports that you have to ride it right in the envelope. Mm-hmm. I think that what's really come out of this is some of the other tangential stories. And that's the piece that I think has a lot of people talking.
Yeah. So the pile-on effect is real, right? One thing happens fine, but when you start to have other things popping up, what was popping up on lots of forums, airline pilot forum, Reddit, you name it, all over the place. The same operator had a landing gear failure at SAN in September. And then what also came out, which me as the safety reporting girl got really frustrated about, was that the same operator had an excursion from the runway at Teterboro, not a couple weeks before the landing gear failure. So that makes me go, why wasn't, and this does happen, like not everything is reportable to NTSB. There are certain things that happen. If the incident is insignificant enough, you don't have to report it. It doesn't end up in the accident incident system, which I think is a bit of a problem. Like, aren't we supposed to be like looking at all these things and learning from all these things? If it's not getting reported, no one knows it's happening, and then we can't really like work together to figure out like what's going on, right? But unfortunately for Jet Excellence, they've now had basically 3 incidents in a 6-month period. People are starting to question what's going on. Is it maintenance? Is it training? Who knows what it could possibly be? We can only speculate, but they're getting headlines for the wrong reasons now that this has occurred.
Yeah. And for those that I read an article about the rebrand from Jet Excellence or from Bel Air to Jet Excellence. And they're a North Carolina based group. So Bel Air is BELL, like the ring the bell, like Campbell, which is the last name of the guy who started it, not like Bel Air, like California. So they're not a California company. I know that could be very confusing. And so they said, hey, we're rebranding because of, the Jet Excellence better stands for how we serve the industry, all of that kind of stuff. It's just when people start rebranding and start having incidents, or just after they start having incidents, that's when the spidey senses go up for people in the industry, because it's typically not a great correlation.
Yeah. And to aircraft itself, the Citation 10, I don't know. We have to look at the reports that come out, but there have been a lot of high profile things happening, either from maintenance perspective with the Citation 10. I will remind people that the reason people love it so much is because it's really fast, but that also means it's really fast. And when you're not stable on an approach, things can happen really, really quickly. Time will tell, but they're in the news. I think people are paying more attention to this and to the Citation 10 in general, especially in certain airfields.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, speaking of in the news, P. Diddy is back in the news. Not only, and by the way, side note, if you haven't watched the P. Diddy documentary on Netflix, it is fantastic. So and good. Also, don't piss off 50 Cent. I'll tell you that. Do not do it, because he was brutal. That is a sidebar. But P. Diddy is back in the news. He is no longer a private jet owner. So hooray, we don't have to read any more articles about P. Diddy making money while he's in jail, even though that's like not really the case. So he is officially no longer an aircraft owner while he's in jail.
Yeah, so his matte black 2015 G550 has been sold. It's now on a San Marino register, which is almost why I brought this story up, because this is a really weird situation. But first, it probably sold anywhere from 15 to 30 million. I assume there was a discount for all the baby oil that had to come out of the seats.
Oh, that's bad. Oh, that's bad. I really hope the listing said fresh interior. 2025 interior. Somebody call Jet Detailing Guy and tell him, for the first time, you can actually charge $150,000 for this detail, because it's going to be yuck.
Oh, yeah. And Detailing Guy was the one who put the stuff out there about Jet Excellence, by the way. So now he's getting into like aviation safety on top of being like a genius business person. I don't know. I just can't with that profile, and I won't even say his name.
Detailing Guy. We all know.
Detailing Guy. We know. So, okay, the reason I really brought this story up was because I started doing some more sleuthing. Jessie had a sleuthing day yesterday. I was just like really enjoying these stories. So this airplane got moved to the San Marino registry, and the San Marino registry is pretty recent. It was developed in 2012, but it's also all related to this company called Aviation Registry Group. And what Aviation Registry Group is doing is they're going to all these really small little places like Aruba, San Marino. Now they're working on Gibraltar to set up registries for those countries and set up like some of the CAA, the Civil Aviation Authority processes. And I just find this like fascinating that a private company has basically found this little niche of an industry to go in and make aircraft registries in these little tiny places all over the world.
Yeah, they're kind of moving across all of these little countries you've never heard of. Like, the only reason I know about San Marino is because of the San Marino registry. I would have no other reason to know about that country. And I had heard about this. I heard about this at CJI a couple of years ago, that they were talking about doing this. And I was like, how does a pseudo-private company aggregate pseudo-government things? And I think that it's the Aruba registry. I talked to someone who went to the office. It's like 8 people in there. Like, it's not, we think NREG, FAA, massive, huge, all that kind of stuff. Like, these little registries are not a lot of people. Like, it's just a few people in an office. And like, if you didn't know that it was there, you could totally walk right by it. And so that's the thing that I think is super interesting. The San Marino registry is very popular in the Middle East because you cannot really do a lot of intra-Middle East travel on NREG aircraft or, French or German or whatever. This is like we should call this the registry episode because we started and we ended with registry questions. But San Marino is really popular in Dubai, for instance, because it basically gives you operational ability between all of these different locations that are non-US, non-South America, call it all North America. So it has distinct operational advantages to be on one of these registries. I think a lot of charter birds in Dubai are on the San Marino registry. It's really hard though to understand, like as an American, like it's totally different. Like the way that the registration works, you usually have, like, from a lender perspective, I have a friend who did a deal on the San Marino registry and he had to repossess it. And he just called the head of the San Marino registry and they answered and they said, hello. And he was like, oh, I didn't even get your secretary. So, it's a totally different world than operating in the
Well, because this brings in a lot of issues for lenders and financiers because, all right, you have these tiny little registries. How good of a job are they doing at monitoring their assets, right? Because this is it's a compliance issue. And if you have a registry, you also have to meet the EASA or ICAO standards. So this company goes in, they build out this compliance stuff for that country. They submit it, to whoever it needs to get submitted to get approved. And now there's a registry, but does that little country really have enough authority and expertise and knowledge to monitor them? There's a, conflict of interest issue because, all right, the person who's making money off the registries is also the person giving compliance stamps. So it seems like they're doing okay, but I know there are some little countries that have registries that lenders will not touch or get near with a 10.
There's big countries. India won't touch the 10-foot pole. Some of Mexico, no-go. Most of South America, other than Brazil, is pretty much a no-go. Argentina, kind of. But yeah, it creates this whole ecosystem of, capital moving in and moving out, being able to repossess and collateralizing your asset. And how are you doing reporting? And how does safety reporting work and all of that, right? And so it's an interesting thing. But back to the story. P. Diddy, no longer an airplane owner. Best of luck. Whenever you get out, you'll probably end up chartering, let's be honest. And if you can even afford to charter, I don't know. That documentary is pretty brutal, so not sure how the rebound's going to be. Well, that brings us to the end of the VIP Seat podcast. This is the part of the show where we ask you for a favor. We need you to do one thing and one thing only. We need you to hit the share button and send it to a friend who's in business aviation. Every week, we bring you the top 5 stories in business aviation, real analysis, real gossip, real stories from the industry that you probably won't hear anywhere else. So we need you to help us grow this show. We need you to hit share. Go sign up for the newsletter, thevipseat.com, where we send you a recap of all 5 of these stories. And now it is time for you to either go into the office or leave and walk into your house, and you are a little bit smarter about business aviation. For Jessie Naor, I am Preston Holland. Thanks again to RealJet for sponsoring this week's podcast, and we will see you all next week.